Do you think that the response that my friends and family gave me to my idea of starting a podcast about Congress was positive? Like, do you think anyone was like, "That's a great idea"? Like, especially in a time when no one was making money, most people didn't know what a podcast was. This was pre-Serial. People thought I was insane, and I did it anyway. And the reason was that I felt like it was a good idea, and if I didn't try it, I would always regret it.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode number 39. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klunder, and we're switching gears just a bit on today's episode. We are talking politics. I know, taboo, but don't press stop in disgust, frustration, and overwhelm. You are going to love this conversation with Jennifer Briney of Congressional Dish podcast. I discovered Jennifer and her show earlier this year at Podfest in Florida, where she was keynoting about how she funds her podcast, her production team, and her life 100% through direct listener support. No ads, no sponsors, no links to sign up for her XYZ course, just straight up value for value between what she's creating and the people who consume it. In this episode, you'll get to hear about our mutually impostor-y experiences around that event, the awkwardness of asking for money, Jen's huge leap of faith, and her take on what exactly is going on in our government right now without straight up ranting and bashing, I promise. Also, we laugh a lot in this episode. Who knew politics could be so funny? Jennifer's show, again, is Congressional Dish, and if her story inspires you to take action on a creative dream or a spark of an idea circling around your mind, I'd love to help you get started with that. As of this episode, I'm offering my How to Start Anything audio course for free, and you can get it at thecreativeimposter.com/magic. And now, here's Jennifer Briney of Congressional Dish.
So, Congressional Dish is my attempt to be a person that you can handle to be around because I was not into politics or any of that up until 2003 when I was studying abroad in Germany. And so while living in Germany, we started a war with another country for reasons that no one was quite understanding at the time. And I had the experience of coming home to see my country in a completely different way because I just assumed that everybody here was having conversations about this in bars and skipping class to watch Tony Blair debate. Like I figured the whole world was taking it this seriously. And then I came home and found out that that couldn't have been further from the truth. All of my friends were talking about the movie Old School instead of the war. And then when I turned on the TV, they were cheering it on instead of questioning it. So that's really when I started asking questions. And in the Bush years, I was kind of difficult to be around because I was just so horrified that I would just like yell too much. And so years later, I was still asking questions and all the answers led to more questions. And through a lot of talking with my dad, who's a Republican, he pointed out that like nothing that was done in the Bush years could possibly have been done without Congress. And so that really, it really got to me. And so then I started looking at my branch of government and realizing I knew nothing about it. And so I had been into talk radio and the talk radio station that I thought that I would be a good fit at, it didn't exist anymore. And so I decided to start a podcast because the technology had gotten to the point where I could. And for the first year, I taught myself about Congress by trying to read every bill that passed the House of Representatives. So for the first 2 years of Congressional Dish, you can hear me slowly losing my mind when I realized that the do nothing Congress actually does a whole lot more than we're told. And so now I'm 4.5 years in. And the structure of the show has changed a little bit now that I know that I can't read every bill and that I know it's also not necessary. And it's still just my journey of trying to figure out what is going on, how the laws are changed, and what is our role in this world.
Okay, so how long are most bills that pass through Congress when you're trying to read them?
It's funny. I get this question all the time. They can range anywhere from like 1 page to 2,000 pages. Although you do have to keep in mind that when you hear those numbers, congressional bills have giant margins. and a lot of the words are not necessary. So as I read more and more bills, I'm very good at figuring out where the meat of the bill is without having to read every word anymore. But yeah, the range is unbelievable. So it's like I never really know until I sit down and I start the reading. I never really know how long it's going to take me. Like, for instance, one of the hardest bills I've ever read was 4 pages long, but it amended so many different laws and I had to go into so many rabbit holes to figure out what was going on. It was also a financial bill. So it's like, it's just scrambling my brain, even just the topic. But that was one of the hardest ones. And then there's also the government funding laws that are sometimes 2,000 pages, but those I know how to use the charts now. So yeah, there is no average. I never know what they're going to hit me with. It's chaos up there on the hill.
I feel like this year and with this presidential cycle, I consider myself to be fairly well educated and fairly intelligent. I've never taken a major interest in politics necessarily. And part of the reason is because I find it so opaque and frustrating. And I think that this year I was really trying to pay more attention and learn more and be more actively involved and better informed. And for a long time, I never even voted because I would say, well, I'm not really that well informed. I have not taken it upon myself to become that well informed. So therefore, there's no reason for me to vote because I don't actually know who or what I'm voting for. And so that was like my justification for a really long time. I'm not proud of that necessarily, but that was really my standpoint. And I realized this year when I started trying to learn more and be more informed, my extent of knowledge of how government works and how Congress works really is like the I'm Just a Bill song from Schoolhouse Rock.
I know, I've used that in the show before. That's funny.
And I love Schoolhouse Rock, but I'm like, really, this is like the extent of what I know about how our government works. When you launched the show, what feedback did you get, or what have you heard people say in terms of how much we actually do or don't understand what's happening in government? What do you think is most people's learning curve like?
Well, it's interesting because I have a generational divide where the feedback on their own knowledge is very different. So the baby boomers, they had this class called civics where they learned this stuff. And I was born in 1982, and that was the start of the education deregulation. And I never had civics. I had social studies, and I was in AP history, for Christ's sake, and I still didn't understand Congress. And so we have a whole generation of people, and I actually think it's on purpose that we haven't been told how our government works, because this way we're not able to participate in it. And as we've seen, the people that are in charge are able to do whatever they want because we're not aware. And so that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to educate myself. I mean, for the first year of doing Congressional Dish, I didn't even try to make money. I was really just doing this to see if I liked podcasting, see if there were any stories in Congress, just to see. And yeah, for that first year, I was at that same stage that you feel like you're at, where it was just like I understood the Schoolhouse Rock sort of, but the details of it were just so different. And the things that I was idealistically thinking how Congress should work are also so different. And it could work that way, but we now have people that are quite disingenuous, and they're not statesmen, they're team players. It's the Democrats trying to beat the Republicans and vice versa all the time. And the way the House is supposed to work, the way the Senate is supposed to work, we're seeing even, 2 centuries worth of decorum being thrown out the window right now. So it's fascinating to see what's happening. It's scary. But I think one of the benefits of my show and why I'm doing it is that I'm trying to take the things that they say. I'm a communications major, so I'm really good with words. I'm trying to take the things that they say and uncomplicate them, because there's words that they use that don't have to be that tricky. So for instance, they always talk about capital. That's money. So it's like, I feel like if you just use words that we use in normal day-to-day life, this stuff is not as complicated as it seems. And so that's one of my goals, is to take people that didn't have civics class and don't understand. I'm really talking to my own generation, and bring them into the process by being like, hey, we should be involved in this. Don't be so intimidated. Come join me. Let's fix it.
That's one of the things that I really appreciate about your show. Most of the things that I listen to, and I specifically started making myself listen to some political podcasts this last year. And I'm always defaulting, of course, for me, to the more liberal slanted shows. And what I really appreciate about your show is that you're not in a standpoint where you're like, I'm pro left wing or I'm pro right wing. I mean, you definitely have your opinions and your biases. It's not that you're like a totally objective, unbiased
Yeah,
news
because I don't think that
source.
exists. So.
Right. That's kind of a myth. But I like that you have this open sort of like critique and criticism of everything that happens, regardless of which side it's coming from or which team, as you say, that we've sort of found ourselves playing team against team. And we so often get caught up in the party politics that we forget to actually pay attention to what individuals are doing, I think, and then how that affects us.
And well, I thank you for saying that, because that's definitely one of my goals. And one of the things that I've learned is that we have this perception of what Democrat and Republican mean, and it's wrong in a lot of different instances. It's also much more complicated. So, like, a really good example is the issue of war and peace. There's a faction of the Republican Party which is the most peaceful people, the people that are trying to stop the wars. And there's also a faction of the Democratic Party trying to do the same. But there is no anti-war party. So it's like, if you're talking about that particular issue, you can't say that like Republicans are warmongers and Democrats are peacemakers, because the facts just don't align with that. Also with the financial industry, same thing. There are certain Democrats that are just as corporate as Republicans. So it's like, you really have to look at who the individual is and how they vote and where they're getting their money from. That's so key when judging why politicians do what they do. And I think the red versus blue divide thing is absolutely toxic. And so it's also something I'm trying to combat, to just be like, listen, we're Americans. That's the only team I care about, you know? So I really appreciate you saying that. It's something that I'm definitely doing on purpose. And it does help that my parents are Republican, yet I live in like San Francisco. So, you know, so I'm also getting the feedback from what is supposedly the other side all the time. I just feel like I can speak both sides. And yeah, it's something I'm trying to do. So thank you.
You're welcome. So going back to what you said a minute ago on a slightly different topic, you said that for the first year that you started Congressional Dish, it was really more of a passion project and an experiment to find out if you liked podcasting before you ever tried to turn it into a business or to monetize it. And I know how you monetize your show now because I saw you speak at Podfest in Florida this year. And I have to say, I'm very impressed, because as a newer podcaster myself, my show's been published for about 1.5 years at this point. And, you know, people always say, oh, that's so cool. You must be making good money off of it. Or, you know, you must be making money from your podcast. And I was like sometimes, sometimes, like occasionally I have a sponsor. And by occasionally, I mean, I've had one sponsor, you know, or occasionally I have helped someone else start a podcast and have a client that I'm helping learn how to podcast, but that's not actually directly making money off of my podcast. And I think that what you've created is really fascinating, because that's the sponsorship question is something people ask me all the time when they're thinking about starting a podcast. They're like, so how do you get sponsors? So tell me a little bit about what you're doing.
So what I'm doing is I'm actually copying John C. Dvorak and Adam Curry. They host a No Agenda, and they invented something called the value for value model. And it's really, Democracy Now! Does it too. They call it listener supported, but it's basically, I have my listeners contribute whatever they think is fair so that I don't have to get sponsors. And yeah, so really I just do a pitch in the middle of the show where I tell people, if you want this podcast to continue and if you got value from it, you're getting the product up front and you should contribute whatever you think is fair. And what's amazing is people actually do. And I don't think this is a model that could work for all podcasts, because one of the things about Congressional Dish that is appreciated is that I'm reading bills, you know, and I'm watching hearings and I'm cutting those. So there's a lot of research and work that goes into the content of the show that I don't think people could fund a just for fun podcast in the same way and be as successful, to be completely honest. If you're just like talking with your friends on a Friday night, like, I'm not really sure it would work. So it's not for everybody. But if you are doing something where you're trying to share information, or if you're doing work for your audience that they don't want to do themselves, this is a really good model. It's working for me. It's working for No Agenda. And actually, there's a new podcast now. It's called the DC Sentinel, and they just started it. They started a Patreon page, and in 3 months, they hit their goals. So people will pay for things that they believe in. And I think you're going to see a lot more people giving this model a try in the future, because the people that are doing it, it's working for us.
And when you first decided to give that a try, and you were like, okay, this is the first episode where I'm going to ask people for money.
Yeah, it's so awkward.
What did that feel like? What was going through your mind and how did it play out?
Oh my God, I felt like one of those people that sits by the subway with a little cup in my hand being like, change, sir. Like it was horrible. And that's one of the things that holds a lot of people back from this model. And I completely get it because I hate doing the pitch. I hate it. The thing is that I sat down with John C. Dvorak and he told me, he was like, listen, you are providing something of value and you need to get that in your own head and internalize that in order to do this pitch and it won't feel so bad anymore. And I actually did that. And I looked at how much work that I did. And it was like, okay, like I feel like I can confidently say this because the work I'm doing does have value. You know, there's a lot of people that don't know what's in these bills and it affects us in a very real way. And you can see I'm doing it right now. This is my pitch. This is what I tell people. And I just try to get in that space of trying to justify it to myself. Like, why do I do this model? Why do I think that people should contribute? And I tell them. And so it's getting a little bit easier, but it's still the most awkward part of every episode for me. It's something that I've really learned how to do over time. I mean, it's been 3.5 years now, but yeah, if you go back to the old episodes, I think you can hear my discomfort with it. It's tricky. It's really tricky.
Mm-hmm. So has anyone ever approached you about sponsorships?
Oh yeah, all the time. I get emails all the time and I just turn them down.
Why did you decide that that's not right for your show?
So one of the things that I've noticed and I'm pretty horrified with is when you turn on the television and you watch the news, there's a lot of things they're not telling us. That was one of the realizations I had when I came back from Germany. And then if you watch the commercials, that's who's paying their salaries, their multi-million-dollar salaries. So it's like you'll watch Rachel Maddow, who as a podcaster, she used to be all about the war and peace issues. It was her number one thing. She was the person I turned to for information about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And then she went to MSNBC and she even said she knew she was going to have to stop talking about it. And when you watch the commercials, they have Boeing commercials, they have Raytheon commercials. So they're actually taking money from the defense or the military industrial complex. In fact, NBC, and I'm not sure if they still are, but they used to be owned by General Electric. So NBC was owned by a defense contractor. And the same thing goes for pharmaceuticals. How many drug ads do you watch all the time on television? And so if there is a drug that's hurting people, we're not hearing about it. And so I just saw that corrupting influence. And I'm not even, in fact, I'm positive that these people that are on TV, they don't even realize they're censoring themselves. It's just an innate thing that you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. And so for me, I wanted the only hand that feeds me to be my listeners. Those are the only people I'm accountable to. This way I wouldn't have to worry about if I insult people in either party, because I do that in like every single episode. I make people mad all the time because I'm challenging that worldview of like, I am on the left side or I am on the right side. And now I don't have to worry about it. And what's nice too is like, it's also the funding model of a lot of different people contributing. So when I do make someone mad and they decide to pull their funding because of whatever I said, there's still plenty of other people. It doesn't destroy my business. If I had one big sponsor and they got mad about something that I said and they said, hey, Jen, never do this again. If they had the ability to pull the rug out of my entire business, I might have to listen to them. So I want to protect my independence as fiercely as I possibly can. And this was the funding model that allowed me to do it. And then I also feel like if I'm going to do this funding model, I can't then be a hypocrite and be like, but I'm also taking this ad, you know, you can't do it. You can't do it halfway. You either do it or you don't.
That makes sense. And so you've talked about how you really viewed this originally and still to this day, sort of like a public service, like you're doing this thing to help people be more educated and to be able to understand how things work and make choices and be informed. But I imagine, especially because you are so opinionated, that not everyone who has heard your show always agrees with you, and you must get some kind of criticism.
Oh God, yes. Every day.
Do you have any good examples of haters?
Well, there was one week right before Podfest that I found kind of funny because I got 2 emails where one called me a liberal C word and the other one said that I'm a Trump lover. I was like, really? Like these 2 emails are back to back. I'm having a little bit more fun with the hate now. I mean, it used to make me cry every single time in the beginning because I wasn't used to the feedback. But now that the volume has gotten, there's so much more of it that my skin is starting to thicken a little bit, finally. So I can take some of it and laugh. Some of it still upsets me, but it's getting easier. And I have friends who are relatively famous, and I had talked to them about it. And they kind of guided me through. They're like, it's really, really hard. It never stops being hard, but you do kind of get used to it and you can figure out where it's coming from. So it's like iTunes is a good example. I stopped checking the iTunes reviews because those are the ones that really hurt. But when I look at the most negative ones, it's always someone who's either on team red or team blue. And they'll just be like, she should work for MSNBC. She's such a liberal, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, I understand that at least. I'm not going to get upset about it because this is someone who has picked a team and I said something that offended their team. They're not looking at politics as like a serious thing that changes your life. It's just, I am team blue. I hate team red. And this person is not helping that battle. So yeah, understanding where these people are coming from helps. And then I've also developed rules. So for instance, like on Twitter, I won't allow a conversation to get into the realm of name calling. If you want to disagree and talk about like a subject or an issue, I'm all for it. I'll go back and forth. And actually people have changed my mind, especially if they provide me with links to back up what they say. But as soon as we get into the name calling, I'm not really interested. So what I'll do is I'll give people one warning. I'll say, listen, I don't do name calling. You call me another name and we're done. If they call me a name again, I'll be like, okay, we're not speaking anymore. And then if they come back and do it a third time, they're blocked. And I've never unblocked anyone. It's just like, okay, I don't need you. Because there's 300 million people in this country. So it's like, I'm not going to win everybody over. And I don't need that negativity coming into my phone and my computer, especially if it's unwarranted. You know, I'm totally fine with people criticizing my opinions. I'm not okay with them criticizing me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's almost like when you can understand where that criticism is coming from, like a lot of times it's something very personal having to do with the person who is doing the criticizing, more so even than it is you.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's hard to have that objectivity about it because it can feel really personal.
Well, and these last few months have been especially difficult because, like I said, I'm in San Francisco and obviously, like, I'm a woman and there's been a lot of backlash and some really mean things said to me because I didn't support Hillary Clinton. And I didn't vote for Trump either. I was just saying they're both horrendous for their own reasons. But the fact that I didn't full-throated be all out for Hillary, it really upset some people in my life, in my personal life too. And that's what really that's what really hurt in the last 6 months, where it was like, okay, this is now bleeding over into my personal life. People who are in my life listen to the podcast and are now at kickball getting pissed at me because I didn't vote for the person that they liked the best, you know, being told that I'm a traitor to my gender because I didn't vote for someone whose record I didn't like. And so the last 6 months, these have been a challenge for me, especially where my topic is Congress, not the executive branch.
Mm-hmm.
Like to take that much heat. And it's something that I know is still bleeding into some of my episodes because when it happens, there's a lot of emotion behind it. I understand it because there were a lot of women who really wanted to see the first woman president, who were really shocked and really upset, and their anger is just being directed in my direction. I understand that, but it's still hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know I'm bringing it upon myself by doing this podcast, but still, it's difficult.
Yeah, and I think that when you have a show, a podcast, or any other creative venture where you're really putting your authentic point of view and pieces of yourself. I mean, even though your show is about Congress, there's still so much of you in your show. And there's so much of your point of view and how you see the world and your interpretations of these different things. It can be very vulnerable. It's a huge risk to put it out there. And sometimes those risks definitely pay off. And sometimes they totally crash and burn. Just depending. Yeah. And since this show is really centered around the idea of creativity and imposter syndrome, risk taking is a huge factor in that, because I think sometimes the fear of a risk crashing and burning really prevents us from being fully authentic and saying exactly what we feel and standing behind, yes, I would love to see a female president, but no, I don't think Hillary's the one. Her actions are not the actions that I want to support, or her choices, or her voting record. And that's a huge risk. Do you see creating your show as risky?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And even before I started it, this show probably started 6 months later than it could have, because when I was considering the idea, I also considered that I was messing with the most powerful people in the world. And the more scary this country gets, I mean, we just saw that guy hauled off of a plane. That was that was the Chicago State Police, you know? So yeah, I'm definitely concerned messing with these people. And I'm definitely, in the beginning, because it was such a small show, it was more of a social thing. So I was afraid of getting that feedback. And it was actually some of my podcasting friends that were listening to the show being like, Jen, you can't keep yourself out of your show. Cause that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to make it all about the information, and it got like boring. They're like, you need to tell your personal stories, and like your opinion is a part of this. Like there's no such thing as unbiased. And so it was actually the podcasting community that was like, put yourself in it. And I was like, yeah, but no one cares about me. And they're like, they care about you more than you think. So that's actually something I was talked into. And when I took their advice, the show started to take off. So I am a part of it. But because I'm sharing like that, I am making myself vulnerable. My marijuana use is a big thing that I'm concerned about right now, because in the Obama years, Congress never changed it. It's still federally illegal. But the Obama Justice Department wasn't prosecuting people for using marijuana. Well, because those laws were never changed, marijuana and heroin right now are classified as the same thing, which is ridiculous. And so even though I'm in the state of California, I have a card, it's all legit, federally, I'm committing a crime. And I'm admitting it on a podcast. I've admitted it on my podcast multiple times. I can't take that back. And so if they really wanted to come after me, there you go. I just handed you the way to do it. So yeah, there's risks in it. And it's like, I didn't have to share that. But when I was discussing marijuana laws, it was like, well, I have this personal experience with it. And this is how it's helped me. It's helped me in so many ways, including helping me keep 55 pounds off of my body. Marijuana was a big part of that. So yeah, that's just one example of a way that I'm sharing something about myself in order to enhance the reason I'm covering a bill the certain way that I am. That is putting me personally at risk in a physical and emotional way.
And so inserting more of yourself into the show was a huge risk that really helped the show to take off. Can you think of any other risks that you've taken around the show, or any that have really helped take your work into a new direction?
Well, I mean, my husband and I, we doubled down on this podcast in a very extreme way. So, I said for a year, I wasn't trying to make any money. Well, I put up the PayPal link. I had maybe like $25 in subscriptions. And my husband, whose income we were living off of, he lost his job. And so we're living in Boston at the time. And we pretty much had a choice. I could go back to waiting tables and stop doing the podcast. At the time I had 50 downloads per episode. I could stop doing this, even though we both felt like there was something here. Or we could get rid of this rent payment, move into his parents' vacation house, which was 3,000 miles away in Oregon, but it was empty. We could move in there, work on the ranch. The ranch had a golf course that my husband could work on, and then I could get a job waiting tables. But by getting rid of that rent payment, I could wait tables part-time and do the podcast, and we could, eat and survive. And so we did that. And I got the apartment released, and we got in our Volkswagen Bug in January, drove across the country. It was a snowy ride. And that's what we did. So we took a huge risk because we saw the potential of this podcast. He liked, and I did too. I liked the episodes enough, and I was finding so much content. And it was like, the feedback was a huge part of it too, because people were just like, I need this information now, And so to get feedback like that, where people are like, I not only enjoy it, but I need it. It was like, okay, if you feel this way, other people probably will. So I'm going to keep trying at this. But there was a huge risk, huge. And it cost us money to do. And we moved 3,000 miles, but it paid off.
Any risks that you've taken that did not work out so well?
Actually, I can't really think of any, no.
Amazing.
But I also I take calculated risks. I don't just jump, So that's why it's like for 1 year, my husband and I, we figured out financially how we could do this without me having to work. But we had a plan in place. And when he lost his job, we had seen the writing on the wall. We had a plan that we then ran with. So we always take a risk, but we also know if this happens, if the ultimate bad thing happens, how do we deal with it? And so that way, when that thing happens, it's like, okay, go to that plan, do it. And I think having thought through all of the worst case scenarios, that's probably the reasons why I can't even think of anything that's gone bad, because we knew what to do. You know what I mean?
Has anyone in Congress ever contacted you?
Okay, so in Congress themselves, no. Their staffers, yes.
Interesting. That question just popped into my mind. I'm like, I wonder if people in Congress are listening to your show.
I've been told, I got an email very recently where I was told in no uncertain terms that people are listening. And that That was right before Podfest, and it was one of a few things that was leading me to have like massive anxiety about the whole show. And yeah, that kind of freaked me out because like I'm that chick that's always been sitting in the back of the classrooms, throwing spitballs, like screwing around. Like I was always smart and paying attention, but like I like the back of the classroom. I like being under the radar. I don't enjoy being the center of attention. And so to know that the powerful, I'm starting to kind of get on their radar, that's when things get real. So yeah, I think there are some people listening now, and I'll just deal with that, I guess, as it comes.
Does it bring up any of those feelings of self-doubt or imposter syndrome, or like, do I really know what I'm talking about?
All the time, because I'll get these emails where people are like, you're the best journalist in the country. And I'm like, whoa there, hold on. Am I a journalist? Like, I'm doing this from my living room with my dog in my lap, sometimes not wearing pants. So is that journalism? But then I look at the work that I do, and in a lot of ways, I don't even like saying this out loud. This is part of my imposter syndrome, but like sometimes I feel like they're right because I look at so many articles that they'll talk about like, let's say a bill, and they don't link to the bill. Or they'll talk about like a law that was changed, and they don't link to the law. They don't link to their sources. I have no idea where they're getting their information from. And I make sure I don't do that. So that's actually one of the things that takes me an enormous amount of time is the show notes, because I give people all the sound clips. I tell them where it is in the video so you can scroll to it and see if I took it out of context. I give you all the links that I use. I give you the texts of the bills. I outline the bills and link to the provisions. So I take so much care in letting people decide for themselves if I took this body of information and was fair with it. And a lot of other journalists don't do that. So it's like I have these imposter syndrome moments, but then I can also go to my own work and be like, okay, calm down. You are doing things correctly. It's fine. I also had one at Podfest. Since you were there, we might as well tell you this. But that was at the end of February. And one of the reasons that Chris wanted me to speak and be a keynote speaker to all of those people in that room, which is like, that is the biggest room I've ever spoken to in my life. And so I was nervous about that to begin with, but I was supposed to be talking about the listener supported model, and my funding had dropped off a cliff. And I still didn't even know what was happening, but here I was. And like, I actually kind of cried about it a little bit, like on the episode, which is also something I tend to do. But I was just like, oh my God, you guys, like I'm doing this Podfest thing, and I'm supposed to tell them the listener supported model works. And I'm watching my funding. Like I was getting a third of what I got in January, and I was flipping out. And so when I got up there, I didn't realize that March was going to be so much better, probably because I cried on air. But I got up there feeling like a total imposter, being like, you can do it, guys. Well, meanwhile, like I'm financially freaking out. So yeah, it happens all the time, but I just kind of have to remind myself like, okay, my bad February was a dream February for most podcasters. You know what I mean? So it's like at the time I thought I was going to get like $3,500 in February, which for most podcasters is amazing. So I also need to put that in perspective, like as long as I'm able to pay everyone I need for every episode, which on Patreon, I just hit the number that I need for that. So it's like that financial panic I had in February, I hopefully won't have anymore. But yeah, as long as I can pay the people that I need to, I guess I'm good, But yeah, imposter syndrome all the time. So many self-doubts, but I guess the key to it is I just keep going anyway.
I think that the money thing is so tricky. Even if you weren't keynoting specifically about the listener supported model, like that was just sort of like a double whammy, I think. But
yeah,
the money thing is so tied into our feelings of our ability to present on something, or our ability to be seen as an expert, or like my ability to give you entrepreneurial advice is severely compromised if I am not pulling in enough money in a particular time period, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting how that can like completely throw us for a loop, specifically around financial challenges in terms of authenticity. But that I'm so glad that you shared that, because you would have never known.
Yeah, I had a cocktail before that. I relaxed a little bit, and I was actually standing in the back with Daryl Darnell. He's my audio editor, and you can ask him. Like I was shaking so badly. I'm like, Daryl, I'm freaking out. And he's like, you're gonna be fine. So it's like I had my people in the back of the room being like, Jen, calm down. Like you're gonna be fine. And they had also been speakers before, so they're like 30 seconds in, you're gonna calm down. It'll be fine. And sure enough, it took a couple of minutes for me to relaxed. But then when I was up there, it actually felt more like I was doing one of my episodes. So it got better. But for the first few minutes, I mean, I was a mess. I don't even remember them. I like blacked them out. So thank you for saying that. But yeah, there's so much nervousness about this, the whole thing of like putting yourself out there in a creative way, doing something that's completely different. It can be a really scary thing. And all the positive feedback definitely helps. But it's still, every time I turn on the microphone or every time I stand up on stage, it's like, how is this going to go? I'm appealing to people that don't know me, don't care about me. I'm a stranger. And they can think whatever they want. And my work needs to speak for itself. And I think that's why I put so much work into it. It's because like, if that's what my reputation is riding on, like it has to be good, and knowing that my work is good, it also helps me with that insecurity. Because the insecurity is the worst when you don't prepare for the test, as long as you're prepared, it's better. So yeah. I'm still so nervous. Just like thinking back and like standing up, like getting ready to go up on that stage, I'm sweating again.
Well, let's turn the topic a little bit and tell me, what are you most looking forward to, or what are you most excited about right now with your show and your business and your work?
Well, I'm really excited that it's sustainable. Hitting that $1,000 on Patreon last week, like that's really huge because Patreon is a per episode model. So it's like I do PayPal, which is per month, but Patreon's per episode. And now I know that if I do bust out an extra episode for whatever reason, I can pay those costs. Because before, like I pay people on a per episode basis, but I was getting paid on a per month basis. So it actually was costing me money to produce extra episodes. And so now that's no longer the case. I'm not at the place where I can guarantee an extra episode will make me money, but I did this for years without making money on stuff. So I'm also not I'm not motivated on the money, but having that sustainability and knowing that I can do this and it's not going to cost me out of pocket anymore, that is huge. That is so huge. And I'm thrilled about that. And I'm also really, really excited for the 2018 election. Because I have gotten so many emails and tweets and Facebook messages from people that are like, I've never been interested in politics before, but this is my wake up moment. And I'm so nervous about the Trump administration, as you should be. And they're realizing like, what's the quickest thing we can do to mitigate this situation? And it's, you need to have a Congress that will investigate him. And the next time we can do that is in 2018. Because the Republicans aren't investigating anything. The business interests, like they're not interested in investigating their own president. So even though that's their job. And so, yeah, I'm so excited by the amount of engagement that I'm seeing for the first time. Like usually midterms, no one's interested in. And I was actually here yesterday with a friend of mine who's running for Congress. Like she just like emailed me out of the blue. She's like, I'm running. Let's have a conversation. And it was one of the most inspiring conversations I've ever had. And had this election in 2016 turned out the way it was, she never would be running. So I'm so inspired because like, what's the point of doing this if I think the country's just going to keep going in the wrong direction? As soon as I give up hope, I'm done with this show. I'm going to go move to the beach on Mexico and like play volleyball every day. But, but I still have a lot of hope, and I have a lot of hope in my generation stepping up in the next few years. I hope I see it.
And what's challenging you most, or where is your growing edge in your work right now?
It's still work-life balance. I'm still really struggling with that. I mean, I thought when I would have all the help I need, which right now I'm pretty close to having, I thought I would be able to stop working Saturdays. And instead, what I'm doing is I'm just adding more to the episode. So instead of like doing one hearing for this next one, I'm doing 3. Like, why am I doing this to myself? So I need to, I need to figure out how to deal with that. But there's just so much information right now that people want and need. And I'm starting to put too much responsibility on my shoulders. So I need to find a separation between this podcast and my personal life and put more emphasis on my personal life. And I've taken more trips this year that are personal than I was in the past, which is good. That's how I keep in touch with my family. But yeah, there's still some work to do in that arena. I need to find the right amount of hours for the podcast and the right amount of hours for me.
How big is your team right now?
So I have Brian who does the art. I have Daryl and his team at Pro Podcast Solutions. They do the audio, and like I love them so much. They do such a great job. I've hired Interview Connections, which is owned by Jessica Rhodes, and my agent is Margie, and they're helping me get onto podcasts like yours and doing a lot of the introductions, because obviously it's hard to meet people when you're constantly talking to yourself in your living room. I also have Jess who does all the checks that come in. Like the accounting for the show is ridiculous because I have all these different ways that people pay me. So Jess puts all of that in order and keeps it organized. And so she provides the list for when I do the thank yous. My sister is now doing the show notes. And then, of course, I have the listeners. I mean, they're the most essential part of the team. And I call them the marketing department because really, I don't do much marketing. I mean, I do interviews like this, but I don't do Facebook. I tweet as myself, but all that stuff about SEO and all those marketing tricks, I don't do any of them. And it's my audience that is telling their friends and family, and the show is growing so much. And so they're the marketing department. I would not be at this level if it wasn't for them.
That's so funny. While we're having confessions of imposter moments, the fact that you mentioned Jessica Rhodes and Interview Connections, when I met her at Podfest, and of course I already knew about her business. I already knew what she did and thought it was very cool. But when I met her and she asked me about my show and I told her, and then she said, "Oh, I have a couple of really great guests for you." And then she rattled off your name and someone else's name. And I was like, but Jennifer Briney she's keynoting. Like, why would she be on my show? And suddenly, like, I was standing there talking to Jessica feeling all nervous, like, why would she want to be on my little show? So
oh my gosh.
And actually, we had that conversation right before your keynote. Like, it was literally on my way in for that session that she pitched you as a guest for my show.
Meanwhile, I'm 20 feet away from you having a panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. And that's a new thing for me too, where people that I haven't met are coming up to me and be like, "Oh my God, are you Jennifer Briney?" And I'm like, "Why? What'd I do? Who told you?" Like,
who's looking for me?
Yeah. I was like, what bill did I accidentally walk out on? Like, what did I do? I always think I'm in trouble. And so I go to these podcasting things and like people are like excited to meet me. It's so weird. It's so weird. And every time that happens, I get imposter syndrome too. Cause it's like, oh my God, I am so not special. Like, do not be this excited, So I appreciate that, but like, why would I come on your show? Because I would love to. Like, yeah, I go on every show that I'm invited on because I'm amazed that anyone wants to talk to me.
Right.
So.
It just goes to show like that whole thing is in our heads. It's just completely fabricated. That whole feeling of not being good enough, or why would somebody care about my show, or why would somebody care about what I'm doing, or why would someone ask me to keynote? Like, it's all fabricated.
Yeah, it's all self-doubt for sure. But I mean, like I said, I still struggle with it and I just do all this stuff anyway. That's how you deal with it, at least in my world.
Something that I like to ask every guest that I have is if someone was listening to this show and they're thinking of starting off on a new creative path or launching something or starting something, they don't know whether it's going to work or whether anyone is going to pay attention to what they're doing, and you had any words of wisdom or advice for them, what it would be. And I am going to ask you that, but I'm going to modify your question and ask it in two parts. And so what is your advice or words of wisdom for someone creatively? And also, what is your words of wisdom or advice for somebody who is new on the political path and in terms of the upcoming midterm elections? What do you recommend for someone who's like still thinking about Schoolhouse Rock?
Okay, so creatively, do you think that the response that my friends and family gave me to my idea of starting a podcast about Congress was positive? Like, do you think anyone was like, "That's a great idea"? Like, especially in a time when no one was making money. Most people didn't know what a podcast was. This was pre-Serial. People thought I was insane, and I did it anyway. And the reason was that I felt like it was a good idea. And if I didn't try it, I would always regret it. So the only bit of advice that I would give is to, like I said, if the worst case scenario happens, have a plan, but give it a shot. So it's like my husband, I had worked when he was in grad school. And so for 1 year, instead of me going to grad school and going in debt, I tried my crazy dream. And that's how we made that work, And so find out whatever works in your situation to give yourself a real shot at the dream, go for it. And if you fail, fine, but at least you gave it a shot and you're definitely going to learn something that'll help. Like if Congressional Dish had failed, I've learned enough to where I still get job offers all the time so this could have led and would lead to me doing something else, probably either podcasting related, or I would get a writing gig, or I could, try and work for NPR. But the lessons that I learned through trying this, there were positives to that, even if the show itself had failed. So go for it, I guess, is my advice. And then as for people new in politics, I think what we saw in this last election is that we're really sick of the red versus blue divide. And I think what we're witnessing is a huge backlash to the lies that we've been told about how divided we are. So I would just encourage people to focus on what you know to be facts and less on fighting with the other side. Because I think a lot of this fighting journalism, which really isn't journalism, but when you turn on the TV, you see a red person and a blue person are brought here to fight. I think that people are disgusted and sick of it. And so if you're going to get into politics, do it for the right reasons. Do it to change things, do it to have good conversations, and do it in a way that you're aiming to find common ground. Because the clickbait that worked from like the 1990s to the mid-Bush years where everyone's like looking for a fight, I think those days are over. I think people are looking to find common ground now. I think we're seeing the pendulum swing back the other way. And so I would just advise people to not do the aisle thing, and if you do, to reach across it.
And what advice do you have for voters for the upcoming midterms?
Vote. It really is that simple. Vote. It is your job. It is your responsibility. If you feel like you don't know enough, read things. But there's no reason to not be voting. It is the one thing that we are required to do as citizens of the United States. So if you don't feel like you know enough, you have the internet. All of the information is at your fingertips. There's no excuse for me for not voting. It's the one thing that someone can tell me that they do that really will upset me if they tell me that they're not voting, because I feel like it's so easy. People have died for the right to vote. It's the thing that makes us different from these countries that we're so afraid of, the dictatorial governments. The difference between them and us is our ability to vote. So to just throw it away, I can't fathom that. So my advice for 2018, register now and vote.
And then last question, is there anything else that you want to share with my audience? Anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had, or any last thoughts that are coming to your mind?
This is probably the wrong answer, but no. I don't know. I feel like I've just like jabbered about myself like so much. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like just my main theme is like, if you have an idea that you think is worthwhile, like do it, because if this crazy Congress podcast can work, whatever you're thinking of, it can definitely work too. And if it has value to you, it's going to have value to someone else. I mean, I created a thing that I wanted to exist. It didn't exist. I didn't know how to get this information in an easily digestible form. So I said, all right, there's a hole here. There's at least one person in the universe that wants this thing. And I made a bet that other people would want it too. And I was right. And I feel like if you want something bad enough, chances are someone else wants it too. They might not know it yet, but when they find out about it, they'll be happy that it's there. So go for it. Just go for it.
As you can hear, I had so much fun chatting with Jennifer Briney of Congressional Dish. And if you had as much fun listening as I did, you will definitely want to listen to her podcast for a critical, hopeful, and yes, sometimes even humorous deep dive into what's happening in our Congress here in the US. Because as I've been coming to terms with as of late, no matter how frustrating or overwhelming it can seem at times, it's better to at least be aware and paying attention than to be completely, even if somewhat blissfully, in the dark, singing "I'm Just a Bill" on Capitol Hill. Jennifer's podcast has inspired me politically, and her model of funding this work that she clearly is so passionate about has inspired me creatively. One of the ways Jen funds her show is through Patreon. And I've mentioned before that I've created a Patreon page for The Creative Imposter with some exclusive gifts and perks that you can redeem when you contribute as little as $1 per month to the show. Patreon is really cool because it allows content creators to get paid on that value for value model that Jen described so eloquently. Think of a Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaign, but instead of helping a creative project get started, it enables the creator to keep going. And at least for me, I know starting is not the hard part. It's somewhere in the middle that it gets a little sticky, and you really need energetic support to keep going, to keep producing, to keep trying new things and adding value and growing. That support can come in so many forms. Sometimes it looks like positive feedback in the Creative Imposter Facebook group, or feedback one-on-one in person. Sometimes it looks like people showing up for things. Sometimes it looks like download numbers in my hosting software on Libsyn. Sometimes it looks like reviews in Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes. And sometimes it looks like money in my bank account. I have yet to really get any momentum going with my Patreon page, so I'd love if you could do me a favor. Go take a look and see what you think. Give me some feedback about how I could make it more tempting, engaging, or rewarding for you to become a contributing member. You can find the Patreon page at thecreativeimposter.com/support. And of course, while we're talking about Patreon, I'll be linking to Jennifer's page as well as all of her social media and her website and her show in the show notes page for today at thecreativeimposter.com/039. And if you have a creative project or idea swimming through your mind and would like some support, structure, or even a system for taking that leap of faith and getting started, right now I'm offering my How to Start Anything audio course for free at thecreativeimposter.com/magic. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you have a week filled with opportunities to reject picking teams and instead stay true to your vision and create more of what you want to see in the world around you.